Hello and welcome to LeapChatz, a podcast recorded and released at least every Leap Day. My name is Magellan, and they're a piece of work, a real piece of work. It's Alan.
Oh God! Why did this episode make me realize that I might be attracted to Italian women? I guess my cousin Vinny did that for Marissa Tomei.
Yeah, I was
Sorry.
gonna say this. We've been here before.
We've been down this path before, and we'll be here again.
Is Fran Drescher Italian?
Well, she's from Queens.
Because like the nanny herself is Italian, right?
Okay. Born in Queens, younger daughter of a bridal consultant in a naval system. Her family's Jewish from Southeast and Central Europe. Her maternal great-grandmother was born in Romania and immigrated. Her father's family came from Poland.
Okay.
She was of European Jewish descent then.
Got it. Anyway, yeah, so Marissa Tomei. I love that Fran Drescher, by the way, icon. We love
Union
Francine
icon.
Joy Drescher. Yeah. Her Wikipedia page is Francine Joy Drescher is an American actress and trade unionist. That's awesome.
Yeah. She was a huge force behind the SAG strikes, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
We love to see it.
But anyway, we're talking about Italians only in this episode of LeapChatz. So sorry, Fran. Hey, Alan.
Yes, sir. The project has found
ourselves. Yeah, we found ourselves here. Ziggy said there was only a 12.3% chance that we were going to do a LeapChatz episode in the year 2025, but Ziggy's not always right, is what I'm learning.
Yeah, sometimes Ziggy just does things to be a dick also. He just turns the power off.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
At any moment, this episode could shut off also. We might not actually get to discuss the eps. But hopefully we do, because they were really fun.
Well, yeah, we'll do our best here. So we watched, we're not going to do the whole thing where it's like, oh, where have you been the last 4 years? Because it's only been about one. But something that I realized, I did a little math, there's 97 episodes of Quantum Leap.
Okay.
And that means if we do an episode every 2 episodes or so, we'll about have a year's worth of LeapChatz episodes. So in a way, we'll have created a leap year.
Oh,
right?
You can just listen to this podcast back to back to back to back for a year.
Yeah. So let's see, if there's like 50-ish and we do one every 4 years. So in about 200 years, you'll have a year's worth of Quantum Leap coverage to listen to.
Amazing. And if, hey, you're new, and if you're only a Quantum Leap fan and you're like, what the hell is this podcast? What are you guys talking about? First of all, fascinating way to come here, but also welcome.
Yeah, welcome.
We're Alan and Magellan. We've been friends for a long time. We do a podcast called Chatz Television Podcast on this feed where we do like a TV book club. Right now we're watching Xena Warrior Princess in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. We've never seen Quantum Leap before. It came up in a previous season called Couch Madness where we pitted a bunch of shows against each other to see which one we'd watch. We liked it enough that we made this plan to watch it at least once every 4 years. We have listeners, specifically listener Emrys, who was like, in LeapChatz 01, you didn't specify that you would do it more than just every 4 years. You said it would only be every 4 years. But everyone was okay with it because they want to hear us talk about Quantum Leap. Who cares? It's funny. That's the kayfabe broken, but now we're in the kayfabe. We've leapt into January 25th, 2025 when we're recording this. And we have to just figure it out. We just got to watch more Quantum Leap and talk about it, which we did. So
yeah, until we're sent back to our original bodies or whatever.
Precisely.
Yeah, so we watched 2 more episodes of Quantum Leap season 1 together this time around. I think in our previous episode I introduced this as the rest or the end of season 1, maybe. If I did say that, I don't know why I said that, because there are 2 more episodes in season 1. But we're almost done with the first season. We watched episodes 6 and 7, Double Identity and The Color of Truth. So first off, we have season 1, episode 6, Double Identity, which takes place in universe on November 8th, 1965. It takes place in Brooklyn, New York. Come on. It was written by Donald P. Belisario, a real Italian piece of work. Uh, I'm part Italian and I live in Brooklyn, so I think I'm allowed to do this. My nonna used to make me some spaghetti sometimes. She had a nice recipe for meatballs. That's not me being stereotypical. My grandmother actually did have a nice recipe for these things. Okay. Uh, it was directed by Aaron Lipstadt, not Italian sounding as a name. Hey, give me your lips stat. That's the only way that an Italian might say that sort of thing. Come on.
Oh god.
Okay. It aired on April 21st. By the way, to be clear, this is not how I'm going to be approaching talking about the second episode.
No,
Yeah. Trying to
no.
trying to have a little fun with it now. Aired April 21st, 1989. Alan, what happened in Double Identity?
In a beautiful send-up of Mario Puzo's The Godfather, as well as Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, Sam
Mhm.
leaps into a mafia hitman who may not live long since he is romancing The Godfather's girlfriend. Also, an attempt to bring Sam home causes the 1965 East Coast blackout. Oops.
Mhm.
John, what did you think of Double Identity?
Um, uh, it was really fun. This is, I think we're probably gonna find that there's at least 3 types of Quantum Leap episode. There's the ones like The Color of Truth that are, okay, uh-huh,
On a very special episode of Quantum
that's
Leap.
interesting. Yep, there's those. There's ones that are like, I see what you're going for here," like the one where it's the nuns and he's his
Boxer.
girlfriend, and okay, I kinda get it, but I'm not 100% sold. And then there's ones like this one where it's sorta like, "Do you wanna play dress up and have a little fun with it?" Um, and that's what this was to me. It really feels like sometimes Quantum Leap is just an excuse to do TV budget versions of, like, period piece movies that
Yeah.
are fun to do pastiches of. So, like, we've done the kind of "We're in the West, and, we're on a farm. I'm a cowboy, baby." And then this one
Yeah.
was like, "I'm an Italian gangster, baby." And I had a nice time. I was very amused and entertained by Double Identity. What about you?
It's disarmingly earnest. I've probably said exactly this
Uh,
before, and it's the pro and con of the gaps that we take with LeapChatz. And we're gonna say a lot of the same stuff again. The show is
yeah.
disarmingly earnest. We watch Doctor Who in the Chatz Discord every Monday now, and I
Mhm,
also describe that show as like just disarmingly earnest sometimes, but
mhm,
it always has bigger deigns to be something greater than just little stories about hope and optimism. Double
mhm,
Identity in particular is just exactly straight down the plate. We're doing The Godfather, we're doing jokes about Italian accents, we're doing fun costuming, and then we're doing the blackout plot twist. That's
mhm,
it. There is no complication to this episode, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really
mhm,
comforting. Once I finally was able to freaking watch the episode and like sit down and hit
mm,
play, I had a great time. We want to talk about that
mhm.
experience, by the way, just for context.
Yeah, just pretty annoying that this was on, I mean, just to talk about streaming services that might not even exist when we come back in 2028. Who knows? I mean, who knows what's gonna exist in 2028, by the way, which, may be part of why we wanted to do this a little bit earlier. But, originally, we were watching this on
Peacock.
Peacock, and now it's not on Peacock? Huh? What? So it just isn't anywhere? What do I have to do? Go to Roku? That's what you did, right? You went to Roku?
Yeah, I found it with ads on Roku.
I didn't wanna make an account on Roku. I couldn't figure out another way, so I just bought the episodes on Amazon Prime.
I didn't have to make an account. I have an account though, so maybe
Oh,
I don't know what's up with that, but Yeah, it's just I was at my parents', which is where I watch most chat stuff because I hang out there on Fridays usually.
Mhm.
And I settled in, I got comfy, I put on Peacock, couldn't find it. I'm like, okay, let me check Google. Google's like, oh, it's on Apple TV. I open up Apple TV. I'm like, oh my god, it's here. The whole show is here. And you click it, and it's like more ways to watch. I'm
Mhm.
like, what about you? Do you have a way to watch? And they're like, no, we don't. We just
Yeah.
have listings and plot summaries and thumbnails for every episode. Okay, so
Uh,
I Google, and then I'm just like, okay, it's on the Roku app. And then I'm on my parents' Fire Stick, and they don't have a Roku app. So I'm trying to stream from my phone, but you can't stream from your phone. And then finally, I found the Roku app. I watched the episode. All that out of the way, though, our streaming present sucks, and it shouldn't be this annoying. And we've
yeah.
had to do this with some shows before. If we have to buy Quantum Leap DVDs at some point, they're not expensive. I'll do it.
Yeah, that might just be the best choice because I have a feeling its existence on streaming platforms is going to be pretty. It's going to fluctuate a lot over the time that we're watching it.
Yeah,
Because also, did they cancel the reboot show? Is
I
that done?
believe so. Yes, I think they did.
I would imagine that was part of the reason that Peacock was making sure that
It stayed
these
on there.
episodes stayed, is because it's like, oh, you got to watch the 2022 show. Yeah, it's canceled after 2 seasons. But now it's sort of like, whatever. We don't want to keep paying to keep this available all the time. Who knows?
Yeah, it's truly unfortunate because the show is great and influential and
Yeah.
fun. So,
hmm
but
But let's talk about Double Identity.
yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, let's orient ourselves here. Where we last left Sam, he had leapt into the body of a guy who had just had some sex or something. Um, and we eventually figure out, okay, we're here. He's learning his name and has this internal monologue where he goes, "What did she just call me? Terrific. No, dummy. Frankie was terrific. That's it, Frankie." I love when we get the little Sam internal monologue as he's trying to figure out like what's going on. He looks in the mirror and he's like, "Oh my god, I'm hot.
I'm
I
a
look
hot young
really
thing.
good."
Mm-hmm.
Over the course of the episode, he figures out he's at a wedding. This is an Italian wedding. Oh, it's not just Italian. There's some mafia stuff going on, and he's like a mafia hitman guy
Yeah.
who's sleeping with the ex-girlfriend of the Don.
Mm-hmm.
That's gonna be a problem. That's gonna get you into some
Teresa.
trouble. Teresa, yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what do you think of this kind of initial scene and the wedding stuff and all that?
Yeah, so I wrote in my notes. I could in the for the second episode, I could watch Sam figure out who he is forever. Like the first
Yeah.
15 minutes of the episode, where he's like, "Okay, what language do I speak? What country am I
Mhm.
in? What year is it?" That's just so fun to me because he always approaches it with a curiosity and not like he's exhausted, but he is at the end of the day like, "Well, I'm here, and this is
Mhm.
just the reality of it." And so, like with that part where he goes up to the microphone, he's like, "I sing," and Al has to be like, "Yes, you sing, and you sing really well. So like, don't fuck this up." And
Mhm.
to watch him become the character, I for a second thought they were gonna cop out and be like, "Oh, when you sing, everybody else hears it as good," but it's like, no, you
Right.
just. What happens is Sam learns to commit enough to the bit that people start to go, "It sounds good enough."
Yeah, right.
It just goes to show how much you can become a character just by through context clues, and it's like
Yep.
this fun little puzzle that he pieces together for the beginning of the first
Mhm.
act. So I loved this whole setup, and then the Godfather stuff is not just in like concept. Like the Godfather also starts with a wedding. The Godfather also has a dawn. The Godfather also has like the main character, being one of the mafia men, has these two guys
Mhm.
that walk with him down the street, and somebody tries to hit them with a car, and then that's a whole drama. Like they do almost like shot for shot recreations of several scenes from the Godfather, which you don't see parodied this specifically very often. Like I
Mhm.
think a lot of
Mhm.
times you see the Godfather, and it's like make you an offer you can't refuse, and in this, the way they do makes you an offer you can't refuse is in the third act when he goes, I'm gonna make sure, because jumping ahead, he jumps into the body of Don Gino later. He's like, I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse, which is I'm gonna get the kids married or like approved for marriage, and then I'll leap out. And the fact that that's also not even how he has to leave is so freaking funny, man. It's always a good little twist at the end. It's never the thing you thought. So yeah, I thought this setup was brilliant. I had a really it eased you into it real nicely.
Yeah, I agree. Part of what's so fun about the process of Sam figuring out who he is that he's just a decent guy. He doesn't want to be
Yes.
mean to anybody, because you could very easily, your brother's like, "Hey, sing Volare for us." He could just be a dick and be like, "No, I don't want to sing," or he could say, "I'm feeling nervous," or I gotta take a piss," or whatever. He
Yeah.
could get out of that situation by being rude or lying, but he doesn't really want to. So he's like, "Okay."
Within minutes, he's
I
like,
guess I have to
Volare! You're like,
Yeah.
whoa.
But it's just fun. You don't often see characters in television who, I guess sometimes you do, but the way that he gets into tense situations is pretty much always by being too agreeable, and just kind of agreeing his way into something that he then has to figure out how to get out of, which is always entertaining. And I love all these interactions that he has with the different people at the wedding. They also do a good job of kind of establishing, this is another trick that Quantum Leap does well. Before Sam understands enough to like interact with characters and get exposition from them, we follow somebody else who,
Yeah.
they live here. This is their life. So we followed Teresa for a bit, and she goes around the wedding. We see how people don't treat her very well or dismissive of her, how she kind of messes with the Don by revealing that he's cheating at bocce.
You
Because
like
he's
that
got
scene?
smooth, yeah, who's using smooth balls? That was great. I love that we're playing bocce. I love bocce.
It's so fun to see 80s
Um,
horny. Like the part where she
uh-huh.
like bends over and everyone goes like, oh, look at her
Oh, I
skirt.
can't look. Yeah. Um, and we get to establish Don Gino's character because they have a conversation where he's a real slimy guy about it. And then we go back to Sam. So, uh, yeah, Quantum Leap just does a good job of kind of setting the world without Sam in the situation, so that we can then also understand when he does get reinserted back into it. Whoa, Sam, be careful. That's Don Gino. Didn't you see the scene where he was really mean to Teresa? Don't you get it? Uh, so it's pretty efficient and fun how they're able to kind of invite us into the understanding of the world right minutes before
Yeah.
Sam is there. Um, and then yeah, I also had a special kind of joy here because I took Italian for 2 years in
Yeah, I was gonna
college.
ask you about that.
So I kind of understood when like the grandma is talking to him and he's like, "Oh no, she speaks Italian. I don't speak Italian." All she's basically saying
He's
there
like, you
is
should eat the food, right?
yeah, she's like, "You should eat this food." She's talking about what's in it, how delicious it is, why he should eat it. And then she's like, "And don't forget we have bingo on Sunday." Uh,
Oh.
and then he's like, "Bingo? Huh? Bingo?"
Where'd everybody go?
But
Bingo?
it is very entertaining that they they don't give subtitles for the Italian when it's not plot appropriate.
Exactly.
So you're either in Sam's position where you're like, I don't understand what's going on, or you speak enough Italian to be like, dude, they're just asking you if you think the food's good.
He's like,
um,
what is this foreign language? I really like that because
mm,
Italian culture doesn't get like parodied in this way as much anymore, or kind of like
mhm,
played for laughs. I
mm,
think in general cultures don't get portrayed the way they do in Quantum Leap anymore for a lot of reasons, which we'll talk
mhm,
about.
mm,
But Italian in this is like, it's not just a funny, silly language. It's like a whole fully formed culture and language that he doesn't have access to. And
mhm,
there is this understanding of like, when we speak Italian, we're treating you with a little bit of like respect because you are the brother Frankie who knows Italian. And so like
Mhm.
they wield the language not just to confuse Sam, but to emphasize who Frankie is in his community.
Mm.
Which again,
Mhm.
the Godfather does this really well. Like when people speak Italian in The Godfather, it's like, oh, it's a Romance language, and people use it to communicate certain things. So I think between
Mhm.
this and the barbershop scene, I was really impressed with how they used the Italian language. Even though in the barbershop scene it becomes just straight comedy, it starts as
Mhm.
like Don Gino sitting Frankie down and being like, "Hey, we're gonna have a private conversation right now," which is how people who are
Mhm.
bilingual work. You know, will often
Mhm.
have sidebars for private conversations.
Yeah, and I think it's cool, this episode, movies like The Godfather, that when they approach this sort of thing, um, they portray a particular moment in Italian American culture and life in the 20th century where you're kind of there's kind of like the dissolution of the like ethnic enclaves for Italian Americans, and the the extent to which Italian American culture remains like strongly influenced by Italy or the Italian language itself. So like Frankie can speak Italian, but his brother can't speak Italian. Um, and I think that says something about sort of the generation that they're a part of and how they interact with their grandmother's generation or their parents' generation.
Exactly.
Um, so they don't really dwell on that too much here because Italians are just one of the groups that white people get to do the accent on TV and have fun with it.
Yeah.
And to their credit, I think a lot of these actors are Italian or seem like they are, but I also would have believed that Fran Drescher was Italian, so I guess I don't have a good barometer for it. Um, but but still, I think they they portray, to the extent that they're going to portray this, a fact of Italian American identity in the 1960s, which is like there's still a very strong core to that community, and then around it there's it gets a little hazier around the edges, and there's all these kind of cultural stereotypes now that are becoming more dominant about Italians are mobsters or whatever, that kind of thing. Um, so I thought that was a cool thing, like you're saying, to see, and to see how Frankie's positioned within
hmm
his community.
Yeah, let's move a little bit deeper into it though. Like this show is
Mhm.
so designed for our format, I noticed, because every scene has an iconic set piece. Like there's the hairdresser scene, there's the scene in the attic, there's the
Mhm.
scene at the wedding,
Mhm.
and then there's a couple of scenes moving around beyond that. But that's like basically it. Like they don't it feels expansive and wide, but in reality I look at my notes and I'm like, there aren't that many places that they have to go to
True.
portray that this is Brooklyn.
True.
um, they have a brief scene at a frat house in Buffalo later, which is what causes the blackout. But beyond that, no, it's like really, it just follows a really good formula.
Mhm.
And speaking of formulas and speaking of math and science, we got our boy Al, who shows up during the singing scene and kind of gives us a little update on the present day, which is that, as we said before, Ziggy cut non-essential power, I guess to save money on the project, or just because he's a dick. Like,
Yeah, it wasn't clear. It's like, wait, is there danger of the project being shut down or something? Is this just Ziggy's pride, or is there some sort of external funding source here? They don't really get into it. They just kind of want to do the gag of like, what's going on with Al this time? He's cold, or oh,
he's
now he's
hot.
too hot.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
no AC. It's funny how much Sam knows about the present. He's like, "Why are you sweating?" Well, it's hot. He's like, "What are you talking about? The machine has AC." He's like, "They turned the AC off." All right. Well, do you have any hints? Like usually Ziggy tells you how to leap. He's like, "Well, he also didn't give me hints, so I can't just tell you the thing you need to do
Mhm.
until 20 minutes
Mhm.
into the episode."
Yeah.
Uh, so Sam goes to. Oh, sorry. Did you have a point about that?
No, just the other thing that Al's doing in this episode is Al is Italian and speaks Italian and tells, uh, which we'll talk about in
Haircut scene.
the barber scene, the hairdresser scene.
Yeah.
Um, and he like just talks too fast with too much Italian sometimes.
So funny.
Very funny. Yeah, very enjoyable.
Sam knows that he likes Teresa. He knows that his character likes this woman, and so he
Mhm.
sees her when they're walking down the street in the hairdresser place where she works, and he goes inside,
Mhm.
and then he's like, "Can I get a cut?" Before realizing that this is so like it's important to like let little kids and people watching know about the historical fun facts. Unisex
Mhm.
haircuts were not a thing in the 60s. Did you know?
Mhm.
So he goes in, everyone thinks it's really weird. I love scenes where Sam walks in thinking everybody's normal and has to go, "Oh wait, sorry, you guys aren't normal the way we are now in 1986 America." It's very
Uh-huh.
80s of the show to be like, "We're normal. Everyone else is backwards."
Yeah. I was thinking about it, and even still today, I feel like haircut establishments are very much segregated by gender, or there's just an assumption of,
Yes.
"Oh, well, this is a guy's place, this is a lady's place," kinda thing. Um,
But people will always take your money. People will not turn you down or really give you.
yes.
They'll make like a strange comment, but like you can walk into a women's hair shop hairdresser right now, and a woman can walk into a men's hair barber shop and be like, "Hey, what's up?" And they'll take you because money speaks.
Right, right, right. Yeah, but it's just like we still actually do have those stereotypes. It's just that now it's impolite to say them, uh,
Yeah, that'll come up
which
in the
is
second episode a
something.
lot.
Yeah. But it is intriguing and, kind of a thing that people don't take, into account very much when, you're doing a time travel story, which is even if we were to travel to the '60s, it's only 60 years ago, there's just so many little things about everyday life. Um, like in the next episode, not to say too much about it, but there's this little moment where he's like, "Okay, I'll just go throw this in the trash can." And Al's like, they
They
don't
don't have
they don't
trash.
have public
Public
trash
trash.
yet. That's not a thing right now.
5 o'clock shadow isn't popular for men yet.
Yeah. So it's really interesting that they're being attentive, and I like that they're being so attentive to these small details, and forcing Sam to have to confront the fact that, like, "Oops, I just made a very minor social faux pas that says a lot to the people around me about my mental state or how well I understand social cues in this environment, and now I gotta cover it up."
Yeah.
Um and I think that's fascinating, and ends up being, in this episode and in the next episode, extremely consequential to how characters interact with him.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's there's almost some metaphor to be made there about like Sam as somebody who is maybe neurodivergent
Mhm.
or just like used to certain types of social cues and has to constantly go
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I'm sorry. The society I'm living has a completely different rule book. I barely know my own rule book, and now I'm learning a
Mhm.
different one." And it's all these
Yeah.
little things that make people, like you said, look at me funny or go like, "Oh, that guy's not right in some
Mhm.
way or another." They're not judgmental, but it's just like you see people in your day-to-day life that you're like, that guy was weird. Okay,
Mhm.
I'm gonna move on, but that guy's definitely weird. I'm gonna remember that.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think it also calls attention to the ways that, culture changes that are much smaller than the kind of bigger changes that we tend to focus on. Um, but just like, you know, here when, like, he says the word "awesome" to Teresa later, and she doesn't know what that word means.
awesome.
"Awesome? Okay, awesome." Or here where he's like, "Oh, I'll just go get my hair cut wherever," and I don't think anybody's ever paying conscious attention to the fact that there isn't, like, there's not anything stopping me from going into a predominantly female-operated hair salon and getting my hair cut. Um, and that's me, not something I would have ever consciously thought about or wondered, has this changed or how did this used to be years ago? But I think part of the larger project of Quantum Leap as a show is very much about making us attentive to these little things that we take for granted and like, oh, well, actually, that's a very recent change, or this wasn't like this a couple decades ago. Or what are the things that you're doing right now, taking for granted right now that are similar to this the hairdresser thing
Hmm.
that are going to be different in a couple decades from now? And I really, I think that's, like, kind of a beautiful part of the mission of the show, that they're just always drawing attention to the lived reality of the small things in life. Um, and in the second episode, like,
The
how
big
big
things.
those small things are.
Hmm.
Um, and that's really, I think that's really important, and there aren't a lot of shows that do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it does end up. I joked earlier about it feeling like fun facts, but it is more educational for like. This is an era when parents watch TV with their kids. Like we see on The
Mhm,
Simpsons. As The Simpsons gets popular, it portrays this world where everybody
mhm,
gathers around the TV, and so they can talk about sex and how Al had sexual thoughts as a fourth grader in this episode, which is so strange. And
mhm.
Sam has to be like, why are you telling me that? I didn't want to know that about you. And those are moments for the adults to laugh about and dad to be like, same. But then, like, also just, hey, did you know they didn't have public trash cans in the 1960s? And for a little while, they didn't do that until the 70s. Huh, interesting. And that's the stuff for the kids to watch and be like,
Mhm,
oh, gangster movies are cool.
mhm.
Moving along, though, Don Gino comes in because he sees Sam with Teresa rizzing her up. He comes in with
Mhm.
his men. One of his men, if you didn't catch, by the way, Mark Margolis, also known as Hector Salamanca from Breaking Bad. Uh, it's
Cool.
so weird being like, that's the thing I
Good.
know him from, in a wheelchair playing an iconic role, and now he's like standing tall and silent in the back, and I'm like, Mark? Hi, Mark. It's just weird how like a certain role can define you for so long.
Uh-huh.
And other comedic beat I loved here, Teresa he's like, give me the razor. I'm gonna give him a cut. Like to threaten him and to say I'm gonna kill him.
Mhm.
She hands him a safety razor. He goes, a straight razor. And she's like, we don't have those. We're a women's hair salon. And he takes the razor out of the safety razor. He like pink. Like I turned it into a straight razor.
Yeah.
And then this is where, yeah, Sam is being spoken to in Italian, and Al is like, just say this, and Dex says some Italian. It goes fine. He's saying like, oh, it's this. I come here to learn
Mhm.
information about the women because they say stuff to each other, and then Al just goes off on like a tear of like a 1 minute sentence when you just see Sam looking at him like, bruh, you want me to say all that? Fuck you.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just funny how Al is his helper, but is so flawed, and like sometimes in intentional ways. Like he's also just enjoys messing with Sam.
Yep.
Um, Goes back to what we've talked about in previous episodes, which is that their relationship makes any scenario they're in funnier and better.
Yep.
So he has to get her back to the attic, and the way he does that, he's like, "That was the best sex we ever had," and she
Do they
gets.
explain why she has to be in the attic? I think
I
I
think
missed the explanation of
I think
that.
because the Don is going to come up there and catch them, and he needs to then switch into the Don and approve the marriage.
But is he planning to switch into the Dawn? That felt like it was just kind of an accident, and then he sort of went with it.
Well, I think that's what was going to happen in like normal course of history, is they were going to go up again.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's kind of
So
like we
he just
need,
had to recreate what they were gonna do.
yeah, and maybe leaping also has like a Wi-Fi distance. Like, yeah, I need you to be next to where the Don is
Uh-huh.
to stop him from shooting them, because his ultimate goal is to not like let them get killed. And so he's
Right,
like,
right.
let me put you into the moment where he was about to shoot, and then fix it, make it so he
Got it.
doesn't shoot for some reason.
Got it.
But the way he tells her to go up there is he's like, that was the best sex we ever had. She's like, even better than under the table. And it's so horny. She like kicks her heels off. She's like getting off on him telling her how good the sex was.
I love
Wow.
I love Sam Beckett being like,
Uh,
yeah, definitely. Wait, we what? We had sex under the table?
which is
Never
so
heard
funny
about that.
because Scott Bakula is one of the hottest men alive, especially in the 80s. And so it's like, you have Riz, Scott. Come on now. But he
Yeah.
plays him as this kind of like Shelby, like, and you would too, any of us, even though he's charismatic man of the world, put into another man's body with people he doesn't know.
Yeah,
Be like,
yeah, of
how do
course.
I
Of
put
course.
it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, flipping that switch is hard.
Yeah, it's not that like Sam is especially prudish. It's
Yeah,
more uh he's just having trouble playing this guy who like has sex in unusual places.
exactly.
um and is also uh getting caught off guard and surprised by these pieces of information, and
Precisely.
it's pretty fun. It's a lot more fun than if Sam was into it, and
Yeah.
was like, yeah, like you kind of need him to not be super horny himself. Even though he always seems to think, all right, there's a beautiful lady. Obviously, what I'm here to do is kiss her and save her. So let's
Like he has
do
this
that.
inherent pull towards it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It's funny though.
Mhm.
I like that before this conclusion, we get one more comedic interlude from the sort of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of the episode, Primo and Secondo, which, if you don't know Italian, literally means first and second.
First and second. Yeah.
I don't know if that's actually their names or if it's because they are his first and second. I think that's their names. Because the Nona earlier says, like, oh, you know, a Segundo, why don't you know Italian?
It could be, or it could be like the firstborn son and the secondborn son, I think, is what's happening there. And Frankie's the youngest of the three. I think that's what it is.
To me, that is not a very creative name for your kids. First and second.
No.
But Italian's like a complex language. So anyways, he tells them to go to Buffalo, to a frat house, and plug in a hair dryer or a blow dryer. And they go there, and there's a frat guy, and he's living out Animal House in the corner, and they plug it in, and they shut down the fucking power grid. And we cut to the power plant, and they're like, we just lost Massachusetts. We lost New York.
That whole thing was so funny.
If you don't know that this is a real historical event, it's even funnier. Like, what's the purpose of this gimmick? Why is this happening?
Yeah.
I'm sure most people in the 80s, at least the parents, would be like, yeah, this happened.
I remember this. Yeah. Yeah. If you don't know that it really happened, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it to be here. You could cut it out of the episode entirely and it wouldn't change the episode at all.
Because he doesn't even do it. It's just like we send other guys to do the Northeast blackout.
Yeah, right.
And then you have to go up to the attic, and then right before Don Gino shoots him, he switches into Don Gino, which is a thing we haven't seen before. A same universe swap. Once he figures that out, there's a lot of humor getting to see Frankie be Frankie. Just like rapid fire humor. We can talk about it in Stray Notes, but he's like, oh, I'm going to approve your marriage, and then I'm going to make it so even if I jump out, Don Gino can't undo this. So they go to the church where the bingo is being played. He goes to the priest. He says, "These two, I approve this marriage. Congratulations." Everyone does the Italian 2 cheek kisses. And he's like, great, everything's done. There's this very funny shot right at the end where he's behind the priest going like, here I go, I'm about to leap, let's go. And he doesn't, and then the priest turns around and he just goes, yeah, hey, what's up, man? Like, he doesn't want to look weird, so he just shakes his hand a second time.
Yeah.
The priest is like, yep, you're still behind me, that's cool. And what he actually had to do, they talk about this, is Don Gino helps people cheat at bingo, and so he just has to call out the bingo card himself, the bingo ball himself.
Yeah.
So that the Nona can win. And she wins bingo, and that's what he has to do to leap. That's the episode.
Dumb.
I love it. None of this had to happen. None of this had to happen.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that he had to do everything else and that. They don't really make it clear. Is it just that he only had to do the very last thing, or did he have to do the entire episode? But it is a really funny moment every time when Sam's like, all right, I made the world a better place and now I can leave. And the episode says, no, you got to do something stupid first. Ziggy didn't account for this.
Yeah. Any stray notes on the app?
Oh, you wrote this down, but that moment where he mentions Jimmy Hoffa.
What? The Teamster
Frankie's
is
like the Teamster? It's like Ronald Reagan, the actor?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good comparison.
Let's see. I loved the little moment where Don Gino comes into the hair salon and he says, "Get me a razor, Teresa." And both Teresa and Sam in Frankie's body say, "A razor."
A razor? You can't not. Oh yeah, did you talk about her catchphrase? If I'm lying, I'm dying.
Yeah, that they really
want to make fetch happen with that one.
I didn't love it.
She said it like 5 times and it was never funny. It was charming, but it was never funny. And then at the end when he says it to her and she's like, "Oh, oh, he knows my catchphrase. It's like, okay, you've taken this joke all the way around. Good for you.
Yeah.
If I'm lying, I'm dying.
Yeah. But no, that's it. It's a fun one.
My last bit, speaking of Primo and Segundo, the best characters in the episode. I didn't know A and P supermarkets were Greek. I didn't remember the context of that one.
Because there was like a Alpha Epsilon Phi fraternity.
Oh, and so A and P, they're Greek, but at the time
AEP.
was just AEP. Oh, okay. It's just comedy bits that don't make sense anymore. No, A and P. Oh, AEP is the name of the frat. A and P is the name of the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
God, that's the joke. Again, jokes that don't play anymore. I love watching shows from the 80s. They don't make sense.
Yeah, A&P went out of business in 2015.
Okay.
But it operated from 1859 to 2015. From 1915 through 1975, A&P was the largest grocery retailer in the United States. And until 1965, the largest U.S. retailer of any kind. Whoa. So it was like huge. And this joke definitely played very well in the moment. And now we have no idea what it means. That's so funny.
Yeah, and then did you read about the 1965 blackout and like what happened at the time?
No, I did not. Did you?
A little bit. Nobody plugged in a hairdryer, but there was what's called a protective relay, which is like a thing that does things if certain things happen, like an if-then device. And this was placed. They talk about Ontario and Niagara Falls when the blackout's happening. That's where it happened. The safety relay was set to trip if other protective equipment deeper within the hydro system failed to operate. It was a cold November evening, so the whole power grid is being worked to death by like heat, lighting, cooking all at once. And it was misprogrammed to be like, if it's being overworked, shut it off. And it just happened to be at like a certain node that shut everything off, like in a cascade. And they, it's a weird technical failure, but a kind of a cool little history lesson about how power systems work. They don't really work like this anymore. You can't shut one off and turn off a grid, but like there's a lot of checks and balances. But yeah, that's part. This blackout was part of the reason why they fixed that. Fun facts.
Sorry, there's a note at the bottom of the Wikipedia page for this, which needs additional citations for verification, to be clear. But there's a little note at the bottom that says, reports about an alleged baby boom that followed the blackout 9 months later are considered unsubstantiated.
You got nothing else to do. Listen, I get it.
Yeah.
As somebody who is with child, I'm just kidding. I'm not with child. I will be so annoying on the podcast when I have a kid. I will never stop talking about it.
I can't wait.
It's the legacy of all the white men that we listened to in middle and high school being like, as a father. That'll be us someday. Lord willing. Anyways, any other turnouts? You got that? You good?
That's it.
Groovy. Well, let's take a bit of a tonal shift. And after this brief musical break, we'll be back to discuss the color of truth. Hey everybody, welcome back to LeapChatz, the #1 podcast about Quantum Leap, recorded at least once every 4 years. I'm still Alan, and that's Magellan.
Hey.
I don't know how to make the music not cut abruptly when we do the video version, so for those watching that version, oops, it sounds great. Hey guys, let's take it down in energy a little bit. We're here to talk about Season 1, Episode 7 of Quantum Leap, The Color of Truth. This episode takes place on August 8th, 1955, and it takes place in the generalized American South. They never specify. I looked everywhere. They never specify what state this takes place in.
Didn't they say that she was the wife of the governor? I thought they said Alabama, but maybe I'm imagining.
They do talk about Montgomery because Al says like, oh, very soon after this, Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King are going to do their thing.
The bus boycott, right?
Yep, their Martin Luther thing. But I never heard them specifically say that this place is in Montgomery or whatever. Regardless, the
Okay.
episode was written by Deborah Pratt and directed by Michael Vehar, returning to us
Yes.
from Star Trek Deep Space Nine,
Michael.
Voyager, and I think TNG even. Michael's got a lot storied career.
Maybe some B5 in there
I believe that's
directing.
correct. Yeah. But anyways, it aired May 3rd, 1989. Can you tell us what happened in this episode, John?
I would love to. Let's see. In this episode, as the black chauffeur of an elderly Southern woman, Sam must overcome prejudice to prevent the death of a black woman. That's not what he's told he has to do.
He does prevent the death of a woman, but that's not the mission.
That's not what Ziggy thinks he's supposed to do. Yeah.
Right. He's actually
interesting.
So let's get into it. This is a weird episode, y'all. We had heard about this one, and I think this one and Jimmy are the two I have heard the most rumblings about. We're gonna get to Jimmy eventually. The episode where he jumps into a gentleman with, I believe. I don't know. I don't remember exactly. I don't want to look it up either because I'm going to spoil the whole.
Yeah, we'll just wait till we get there.
Yeah, we'll talk about.
But this episode's also the most highly rated on IMDb.
Yes.
It's written by Deborah Pratt, who, by all accounts, is making Quantum Leap much better than it would have otherwise been.
Correct.
She wrote like 20 episodes over the course of the show's run. And a lot of those episodes that she wrote are the ones that, like this one, take on, okay, let's put Sam in a position that's very different from being a white guy who's like an Italian guy, or I'm a boxer or whatever. So she also, I think she might even be the one who writes Jimmy. I'd have to double check that.
Yeah.
She writes one early in the next season when Sam leaps into the life of a woman. So, Deborah Pratt, I think, is interested in exploring this show as a vehicle for showing other lived experiences at different points in the 20th century. I can imagine, as a black woman herself, like it is an interesting space for her to think about what would it look like to not just have kind of like a white take on civil rights or black life in the 1950s, but like actually put a white person in those circumstances and see how they would experience them. And, not to show my hand too much here, but I think this episode does some really interesting things with that concept. I think I still have some fundamental reservations about it, but it's definitely, the racial politics of it are definitely a lot more interesting to me than something that it resembles very strongly, which we were talking about before we started recording, which is the film that came out the same year, Driving Miss Daisy. And you were telling me that there is maybe some shared DNA there between the two things.
Right. So Driving Miss Daisy, the Jessica Tandy Morgan Freeman iconic film, fairly well regarded to my understanding, is based on a play from 1987 by Alfred Urey, also called Driving Miss Daisy. To most people's understanding, this episode is adapting or like loosely based on the play, but it couldn't be based on the movie because it came out later in the same year that it aired. So it wouldn't make sense. But when you watch it, you're like, this is fully, even if you haven't seen Driving Miss Daisy and you know just the iconography from it, the like black driver, older Southern white woman, racial politics, all of that, it's all here. So it's almost eerie how similar it is to all of that. But yeah. So this is just an interesting, that's like some of the table setting. You mentioned Deborah Pratt, who is, like you said, one of the better writers. She's also like in the DNA of Quantum Leap. She's married to Donald P. Bellisario, so they like worked on the show together. She like executive produced or co-produced a lot of the series. And she, like you said, has brought a lot of the sort of empathy and perspective that the show needs and has like kept it feeling somewhat modern. I will say, I think that the politics of the color of truth represent, again, what I said earlier, a like late 80s optimism about how things have changed and gotten better in like
Mhm.
a almost in a way that feels immature now. Like
Mm.
if a white man were to go back in time into the body of a black man and into the American South at the peak of the pre-civil rights movement in America, uh wouldn't he just be like, wow, everything's so fucked up, why don't you guys just change your hearts or die? R.I.P. David Lynch, by the
Mm.
way.
Mhm.
That's as simple as it would be. And it is that. It doesn't have much more to say other than he would be disgusted by it and he would push against it. But I will say by
Mhm.
the third act, when they really like tackle this, I'm glad that they didn't just say like Sam Beckett fixed racism. Sam Beckett started the
Right.
civil rights movement. He acknowledges in the episode acknowledges that like you are one person who makes a stamp on one town, and that is how most social and cultural movements happen, right? You
Mhm.
help your community understand things, so you broaden their perspective and you question them on, hey, why, to this woman who he's driving for, like, why do you assume that I can't sit with you? You clearly want me to have tea with you. I love that scene. Um,
Mhm.
but you don't think it's okay because society says it's not. And
Mhm.
so at the very least, there's that. But in the way that it does, like on the negative side, like, oh, it does quote unquote fix racism. The final scene where she's like, come sit with me. We're going to eat lunch together. It's like,
Mhm.
that part didn't need to happen. That's like a nice, like
Mhm.
optimistic thumbs up at the end. I almost wish he just left to end the scene where, I know we're jumping around a lot. He left
Mhm.
her at the scene where he's like, if once you've seen the light, you can't go back to the darkness. That's it. Bye.
Mhm.
Done. That should
Yeah.
have been the last scene to me, in my opinion.
Yeah, it I think comparing it to it's been a while since I've seen Driving Miss Daisy the movie, which by the way won Best Picture in for the 1989 year.
Yes, it did.
Um which I was listening to a episode of Trial by Content recently where they were talking about like the biggest, in their opinion, the biggest snubs in terms of movies that didn't get Oscar nominations. And one of the hosts mentioned that Do the Right Thing wasn't nominated for Best Picture, which also came out in 1989, and it feels even worse that that was the year that Driving Miss Daisy won Best Picture, um, because it's in this tradition of movies about black people for white people. It feels like,
Yeah, yeah.
where the way that it's going to portray civil rights or segregation and kind of the struggle for those things changing in society, it's going to portray it as, well, you know, all that really needs to happen is a couple people need to be friends and we just need to be good and nice to each other. And by God, we're going to figure this thing out, which is just not how it worked. That's not what happened.
Hmm.
So, like you're saying, there is a kind of optimism here that's baked into Driving Miss Daisy, into the original play, that finds its way into this episode, which is like, oh, well, what we really need is just for everybody to be colorblind and treat each other equally. And
Yeah.
once they're good and we make those individual choices, society's going to be good. That's a very 1980s and honestly onward way of approaching huge structural issues in society. Is, well, it's all down to individual action and do you take the right individual actions. But I think this episode does a really good job for most of it portraying, when you put Sam Beckett in the body of a black man in the 1950s and he kind of just does his like cavalier, what, this is wrong, this isn't how this is supposed to be. He's not white now, or he's not in a white body, so he's not shielded by his privilege when he says those things or does those things, and that has really dangerous consequences,
Yeah.
which I think is the most valuable aspect of this episode. That Sam is, he's doing the kind of stuff that in his previous leaps he's done too, but he's always been a white guy. So he's always had this, air of there's some safety in challenging the status quo. Um, it is not safe for him to do it here,
Yeah.
and almost gets someone killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a cool
So
parallel to having watched the previous episode before this, where it's like,
mhm.
oh, weird, they don't have trashes, or oh, I don't speak Italian. Like the cultural differences are like fun to him because he can still
Yep.
navigate those spaces very safely, even though even when his life is threatened, it's still like, hey, don't worry about me, I'm just a guy. He can't do that in this episode, so this episode's not
Yeah.
very funny. It's actually quite sad, and a lot of his
Mhm.
reactions are just resigning himself to going, well, shit.
Mhm.
I can't fix this. He's like realizing how systemic it is. And it's very different also. Like,
Yeah.
I want to talk about Roots. I want to talk about like Star Trek and how those both envision
Mhm.
different worlds and different perspectives on things like race and prejudice.
Mhm.
But yeah, definitely watching this, I was like, oh, the way that Scott Bakula has to play Sam here is very different than he did even in the last episode.
Mhm. Yeah, because ultimately, I think what this is putting on display is that Sam's problem is he doesn't have double consciousness. He isn't aware of the fact that he's in a black body in this episode.
Right.
And so to him, he's just doing stuff because it's like, oh, I'm hungry. I'm going to sit at the lunch counter, or I need to sit down. I just leapt into this body. I don't know where I am. Oh, I need to wash my face. Let me go to the water fountain. And when you're in a history class, nowadays in the aughts or the 2010s or whatever, you're always going to see segregation as here's a photograph that clearly shows on one side of the frame is like the whites only fountain, on one side of the frame is uh the one for, I don't want to say colored people, but that's what it would say on the sign.
Yeah.
But the fountain for black people. um and so it's always presented to you in this way where it's clearly framed, here was the divide, and you're never, because you can't really retrieve the moment, you're never really interacting with it as I'm thirsty and I need water.
Yeah.
But it's such a different thing where you're physically literally in the world, in the lived reality, and now you're having to remind yourself as a white person who's never had to think this way before, okay, wait a minute, I can't just go to whatever fountain. There's this one over here that's fine for me to use, this one over here that carries like very negative, dangerous consequences. Um, and that's like a kind of perspective on telling the story of segregation that you can sort of only do if you're a white person who's time traveled into the body of a black
Very
person.
specifically this scenario. Yeah.
Yeah, this exact thing. And that's fascinating to me
Yeah.
that they portrayed that.
Yeah, so much of the project of Quantum Leap is about empathy and about Sam Beckett and the viewer developing empathy for other people of other times and saying, this isn't just how it is in our history books. Like, people lived like this. And it's a little bit saccharine, it's a little bit simplistic, but that's just because of the time. Like, this is a network television show. There are tons of rules
Right.
about like how dark can this be or how serious can this be. And so it manages to approach that with like a surprisingly elegant touch. We went into this being like, oh my God, like years ago, hearing about Quantum Leap. Oh my God, there's an episode. There's at least, if not more than one episode where Sam Beckett jumps into the body of a black person. And I'm like,
Right.
oh my God, that's going to be so yikes. Because we have this 2020s perspective where we are like, we would never do that. And as you were talking about in the first half, like the racism in this episode still exists. People aren't allowed to say things like this anymore. And there aren't as many laws prohibiting African Americans from navigating certain spaces anymore. There are specifically laws against that. So, our legal system has developed a little bit, and our culture has definitely developed to not have to be letting people say things like that out loud. But yeah, it's all still here. It didn't go away, which is really fascinating. So I think there's a lot of angles to discuss in this one. I think my favorite little moment early on was when Al, Sam is like, I got to go figure out the project. I got to go do the thing. And Al's like, you need to take care of yourself, bro. You are a moving target right now. Not only because you started the episode by committing a major social faux pas that echoed throughout the town, but also you are a black man in the 50s in America. Like, anybody you see like kind of wants it out for you and doesn't like that you exist here. So it's not as simple as like in the last episode, like, where do I go to the bed, have sex with a girl? Easy, done, slam dunk. Like, no, you can die and need to be very careful. I want to talk too about the episode's use of slurs. Speaking of the sort of immersive nature of it, and how this is actually an example I personally, and we can talk about this, but like, I think it's a good thing that they let characters say the different variants of the N-word in this. Because they don't shy away from it, because he's in this period. And like, I wonder if nowadays they would even do something remotely similar to this, or if they would be so uncomfortable with how we think about the N-word now that if they just would simply not recreate this episode. Like, could this episode exist today in some form?
Yeah, I'm really curious how the 2022 show approaches this kind of thing, and whose lives we see versus not. Because on the one hand, if you're going to do this show concept where you're hopping and bopping around time and you could go into anybody's body, you're going to end up in people's lives and bodies that are very different from yours. Or you don't, and then it's kind of weird that you don't, or you come up with some arbitrary rule why you don't, which
almost defeats the point of the show.
Right. Yeah. And that's just not going to work, because you can't just say like, the Leap machine doesn't let white people go into black people's bodies. It's like, huh? I don't think that makes sense.
Or women's bodies. Or
right. Yeah. So you got to do this. And then if you're going to do this, like you're saying, it makes sense to, as accurately as you can on an NBC show in the late 80s, portray this is what it was like, and this is what people said. And yeah, I think there is kind of a worry nowadays about doing that. I mean, I was thinking about that clip where Jamie Foxx is describing filming Django Unchained.
Yeah.
And he's talking about Leonardo DiCaprio being really nervous about saying the N-word.
Yeah.
And then Samuel Jackson is like, bro, come on. You need to say it. That's what this guy would have said.
He would have not only said it, but been comfortable saying it. He loves saying it. You have to like it.
Yeah, like, I'm not going to make you feel better about the fact that you feel bad about saying the N-word. You're playing a slave owner. Like, you just got to do it. And obviously Django Unchained is it's a Tarantino movie, so it's ratcheting things up and taking a certain amount of like voyeuristic interest in portraying violence and using harsh language or whatever. So I'm not trying to compare the way that the N-word's used there versus how it's used here, but it was part of how people talked. And I think this episode actually does this really interesting nuanced thing with it, where the what is her name? It's
Miss Melanie.
Miss Melanie. She doesn't use the word. She says Negro instead, and she makes a point of that. Like when Sam confronts her about it, and I forget exactly what he says, but he mentions black. He says black people.
Yeah, and she's
like, what? What do you mean? And he's like, oh, that's what we want to be called, or what we will want to be called. And she's like, well, what's wrong with this word that I'm using? And in that moment, Scott Bakula says the N-word.
Yes.
And says it sounds too much like the N-word.
Yes. That's my favorite use of the word. My favorite use of the word. I think that's the most powerful use of the word in the episode, is what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a moment where it's like, okay, you know what? He's in the body of a black man, and he's like, this is a time where saying this word in this way conveys a transformative point about it.
Correct.
And it's like, yeah, I think that's really interesting. And they do a little bit of there are other characters who call him the N-word. I think specifically her son uses the word
at least twice.
But they don't do it too much, because I think there's a way that you could do this where it's like everybody's calling him that, which might have been what happened.
Yeah.
But it can get a little bit too like, I don't know, a little bit too indulgent if
Yeah.
you're over focusing on that in television. I'm not
Exactly.
sure. There's not like a clear rule about it, but I think the way that they handle it in this episode, I walked away from it feeling like they said something. There was a point to what they were doing there.
Yes. No, 100%. Like, the reason I think that moment when Sam says it is so good is it's what we're talking about. Sam cannot distance himself from this. He's
Mhm,
explaining as a black man to a white woman why the N word and why the way she's using it, the NE word to be specific, sounds too similar to the NI word. And so
mhm,
there, it's like directly out of his mouth confronting that discomfort, which is the whole point. He can't
mhm,
be like, I'm from the future and we're post-racial. Going back to my Star Trek point from earlier, a lot of
mhm,
times Star Trek argues for a sort of post-racial society, but then depicts the tragedy that in no way, shape, or form is this society post-racial. Instead, it's
mhm,
almost like speciesist more often than it is racist. We
mhm.
just think about things differently. And I think TNG was guilty of it. DS9's way less guilty of being like proud of that, from what we've seen so far, where it's like, oh, we go to the past and there's this and that. Um, but I mean, DS9 did also have the episode where they went back to the San Francisco riots and tackled
Yep.
a lot of this stuff and acknowledged that a lot of that was racial and class based. So,
Mhm.
I think these episodes have similar goals of like, by putting yourself there, you realize how little things have really changed and you confront the discomfort. So ultimately, I
Yeah.
think this episode does a good job, actually.
Yeah, I think there's also something about that moment where Sam says that, where it's him realizing it as a character. Like, it doesn't, because the way that he talks to Al prior to this point, they do this strange thing where they're also like, Al, by the way, he marched in the civil rights movement, which kind of makes sense for Al as a character. Like, he's this very sociable guy. He's always in the mix. He has a sense of like how to do the right thing, or he's always kind of telling Sam, oh, you shouldn't do this, or you got to do this. So it actually reads to me that Al was in the civil rights movement. And there is a funny moment where Sam's like, how do you know all this stuff? Al says, well, I have a lot of black friends. And Sam's like, I can't believe you said that. And Al's like, it's true. What
I
am I
actually
supposed to
did.
say? that that was pretty funny to me. I think they could have done a little bit more of challenging Al and his position as like the good white guy. Whatever. But they at least established the fact that like Sam has not really thought about this very critically
Correct.
prior to this
Correct.
experience. So when he's saying to Miss Melney, oh, that word sounds too much like the N word, Scott Bakula delivers it in a way where it kind of seems like he has just figured it out.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, and
Totally.
that is great.
Yes.
That is such a great way to portray that moment.
I would say the one like weak point of the overall cast in this episode is that Al doesn't, beyond that moment. Al is like kind of
Mhm,
relegated to comedy in this. And like, it's okay,
mhm,
they can lighten things up, but I was genuinely frustrated at the scene where Miss Melanie is driving and like hears the train whistle and is about to get hit by the train, and he's just like, you gotta do this, you gotta, and it's like, isn't Al smarter than this? He knows that she can't hear him.
mhm,
But the wiki points out that because she pauses whenever he speaks, they're like, canonically, she's the only person who has ever heard Al talking.
mhm.
Just not true. That's just how scripting works. I thought that part was just like unnecessary, and it's like, okay, can Al like do something or address the prejudice of the times a
Mhm.
little bit? I do think that they bring it back in a cool way where when they're in the jail cell at the end, Al is like singing, this like freedom song.
Mhm.
It's weird that Al's the one singing it, and they know it's
Mhm.
weird, but he still does it. I'm like, that was an
Yeah.
odd choice. I don't know who
Yeah.
else he would have given that song to though. Like put another like black person in jail that and then have them sing it.
Yeah,
That's not
right,
that
right,
that
right.
also feels like tokenism or something or whatever. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the trick is like Al's the only person that Sam can talk to, so he kind of has to know everything.
yes, true.
Which means that you sometimes end up in this kind of situation where it's like, all right, I guess Al knows about the Montgomery bus boycotts and was there, man, and that's fine. Um, it's kind of frustrating to me that every time Al tries to explain some aspect of civil rights history, Sam's like, "Ah, whatever, yeah," and walks away or doesn't really listen. He
Yeah.
doesn't really dismiss him directly in that sort of way, but there's just a few scenes where Al kind of trails off, like, "Oh well, actually, Rosa Parks pretty soon is gonna do that,
Martin
but
Luther
whatever."
King, a big speech, Montgomery.
Yeah.
Someone says like, "Oh,
Um,
my buddy up in Selma," and then that's another part where Sam is like, "Oh no, whatever," and it's like, no, that's
yeah,
that's
this
played
is
for a joke.
something. This matters. Um, yeah, but Al's also interestingly, even though he is that character, he also is the advocate for like, Sam, you're not here to fix things. And almost is this voice of, which is another thing I think the episode kind of handles strangely. He's sort of saying like, look, the civil rights movement is going to happen and fix everything pretty soon.
Yeah, yeah.
So you don't need to worry about
It's
it.
already happening.
Yeah, like this is already going to get fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So you just need to worry about saving this old white lady. And Sam is kind of like, well, that's unacceptable to me because I'm a good guy. I want to do good guy stuff. Um, and that is I think a strange position for Al to take on the one hand, because like, even if the civil rights movement writ large is going to affect some change, the major legislative wins of the civil rights movement don't happen until 10 years after this moment in time. So Sam is still living in a moment in time where this person, this human being, is experiencing bad things and being treated very badly. Um, and so it's the first time that, we're kind of like, don't really worry about this individual person's experience because it's going to get fixed. Even though every other Quantum Leap episode, it's only about that person's individual experience, because there isn't a broader, like, there's going to be the mafia hitman civil rights movement and it's going to
Yeah,
fix all of Frankie's problems.
correct. Yeah, well,
um,
that one it's
yeah,
fun to compare because that episode's like, you need to fix this so that these kids don't get killed even after you leave. But in this, it's
right.
like you can leave, and this man will experience like a countrywide systemic severe racism for at least another 10 years, but definitely for the rest of
Right.
his life. And that part
Yeah.
you can't fix. But it's also about like that's a systemic issue, not the mafia thing is a specific one-off. Like
Mhm.
if these people can get married, then the mafia won't want to kill them. I
Mhm.
understand the difference there. But yeah, it's kind of funny that they're just like, all right, tap out, you're good. You can't fix any
Yeah.
more racism. But we would prefer that, right? We said this earlier. I don't want them to be like, Sam, you made huge steps on the road to
Yeah, like
ending
you
racism.
saved racism. Yeah, this would, if he like also was in Martin Luther King Jr.'s body or
Yeah,
something.
what?
It's like, you got to give the speech. Like
Yeah,
that
man.
would be pretty terrible.
Yeah, it
Um
would.
so yeah, I'm not necessarily saying like there's a better way to go about this, but there is just something to that, of when Sam enters into the life of a marginalized person, um, the only problems that Sam can really resolve are matters of individual action and decision making.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so he can't really fix structural problems. But then as a result, there is kind of an erasure within the show itself of those structural solutions, or there's just like kind of a disinterest in them. We're not marching in the civil rights movement because that doesn't directly affect the material conditions of the individual person that you are within the span of a single day. Like, you
Yeah.
can't save a life by going to a march necessarily.
No.
Your contribution is much more abstract and part of a much larger whole. when you take that kind of action. So I think there are ways in which what we're seeing here, like this particular sci-fi concept, allows for um, a certain kind of empathy that you can't really access when you make Driving Miss Daisy, and it's like this whitewashed story of segregation. But it also, it still is working within a very individualistic paradigm that can be kind of frustrating.
Yeah, and we haven't talked about her much, but a lot of this story is also about the character he's in, that gentleman's granddaughter, um,
Hmm.
and saving her because after
No, yeah.
After the incident at the diner, a bunch of people in retaliation essentially attempt to run Nell off the road when she's driving to choir practice later
Hmm.
in that week, and she's bloodied up. She's in critical condition. She's brought to the hospital. They're not going to treat her. You get to see how the medical industry has to change its way and deal with the civil rights movement.
Yep.
And it's only through Miss Melanie who's like, I'm asking you guys to do this, that she's able to be saved and her life is saved. And she
Hmm.
only does that because Sam talks to her about this and says why it's unfair. So
Yeah.
in a way, yeah, Sam saves Nell's life, and that is one of the objectives that also gets him out of
Right.
here. So I was kind of worried that they were gonna like make Nell be someone like historically important, sort of like the Buddy Holly thing.
Yeah, I was also wondering if they were gonna do that.
Like, and my name's Nell something, and I would have been freaked out. But no, I think it's just like this family needs to survive and like help this community educate itself
Mhm.
a little bit. Um,
Yeah, and there Nell does speak to, like, she's clearly part of a generation of people that's going to grow up, come of age during the civil rights
Correct.
movement, and when she's driving her grandfather home, she's like, "Oh, I wanna, one day eat at the lunch counter and do this and make all those white people mad," and he's sort of like, "Is that the reason you wanna get back at them?" And she's like, "Yeah, and also because it's the right thing to do." So,
Yeah.
I in a sense, she represents a generation of Black people who are going to take up the charge of fighting for civil rights, and so saving her is kind of emblematic of, but it's not materially like you're saying, he's not saving, like, a famous civil rights activist. But in some ways, I think that there is something powerful to that, that, like, she doesn't have to be famous for it to be important
Correct.
to save her.
Black people should be allowed
It's
to
just
live and age and go through the world, navigate
right.
the world, right?
Yeah.
It reminds me of sorry, finish your point.
No, go ahead.
It reminds me of our coverage of Roots from a few years ago, and how,
Mhm.
for those who didn't listen to Roots chats, first of all, I highly recommend it. That was a really interesting project for us, like learning about that much African American history, but also the difference between Roots and the sequel series, Roots: The Next Generation, which we generally seem to
Mhm.
land more in favor of, is that Roots is like, man, slavery was so brutal and sad, and these are good people who are harmed by it. And then
Mhm.
Roots: The Next Generation is like, okay, but what happens when that brutality and that type of slavery is no longer legal, but we
Mhm.
are still firmly in a racist society? But how do
Mhm.
we start a family? How do we live beyond that? How do we not be consumed by bitterness and anger towards what came before and instead try to build something better? So I think like
Yeah.
comparing Sam's character to Nell, there's sort of a Roots to Roots the Next Generation thing of like, you guys are going to see what happened to you entirely differently. And
Yeah.
presumably in Nell's lifetime, like racism will manifest itself very differently than it does in this one. She might
Yeah.
not get yelled at the bus or at the restaurant, but she's still going to be given the side eye or not being able to get a house loan, things like that, not being able to vote, etc.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, like Roots: The Next Generation, that takes us through different eras of American history and portrays, okay, well, post-slavery, now we're starting to see the rise of the KKK. We're seeing, the sort of mob-enforced violence, that comes after that. Would then we start to see the creation of a legal system of segregation, We see that being dismantled eventually. So there is an interest in the mechanics of how a racist society in the United States continues to like remain white supremacist and racist.
Correct.
And this episode, I think, like you were describing, does a good job of exploring. Well, it's not just that everybody in the diner is mean. Uh, it's actually that there's a lot of different ways that white supremacy is reinforced and defended in this. So he sits at the lunch counter and then has a conversation with Ms. Melny's son where he calls him the N word and says, like, I'm going to, hurt you, rough you up or whatever if you do that again. Um, when he goes home and he's making chitlins for his family, which is so funny that he's like, I
I don't know
never
how to
knew
make
what chitlins
chitlins.
were. I don't know how to make them. And his son there is like, what the fuck are you doing? We're like, you're gonna get hurt. You shouldn't be challenging the status quo and putting yourself at risk in this way. Um, then the like shitty white guys go and put a burning cross on their front lawn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that sort of, act of terror there. Um, which but is, they're basically in the KKK. They're just not wearing their white hoods on
Hoods.
that day, I guess.
Right.
But there's also something where like they don't need to. It doesn't matter if Sam recognizes them because then he goes to the sheriff and the sheriff's like, "Ah, boys will be boys."
Right.
Um, I thought that was a really important moment to see how the sheriff is engaging with these things. And then to see the sheriff later be like, "Ah, well, those boys, they didn't mean to hurt her when they drove her off the road. And they thought you were in the car and you would have deserved it, but I'll make sure that they don't mess with you anymore." It's like, what the fuck? This guy is
Meanwhile,
awful.
we saw, Royce the Applegate, by the way, who was on Sequest. Kind of weird to see him play a turbo racist sheriff.
Sequest.
That it's funny for us then to see the scene where they drive her off, and right before that they're like, we got to show him a lesson, let's find his family and do this. And then when they run her over, they go like, oh my god, she's so bad at driving, we gotta go, she's so stupid. Like,
it's awful. Yeah.
That's how this is justified. You just all you have to do to completely wash your hands of it is to be like, I don't know, wasn't my fault, she's stupid.
Yeah, the pervasiveness of that. And to see it like in all different modulations of it. There are the virulently racist, we're going to say the N-word, we're going to put a burning cross on your lawn, we're going to try to drive you off the road. Those are some of the people who are benefiting from and reinforcing white supremacy. But then there's sort of the sheriff who's like, what's the big deal? And then there's Miss Melny herself who makes some tea. Sam goes to sit with her and she's like, oh, well, you're not supposed to sit with me.
Yeah.
And it's like, but nobody's here. Like, nobody's seeing us. We can just sit at the table.
The rules.
She's like, oh, but it's not how it's done. People just don't do that.
Yeah.
You're supposed to go into the kitchen and drink your tea, like where I can't see you. And then
that's how it works.
Right. And then for her to go through this whole process with him, to directly see the doctors at the hospital try to turn them away, like it's illegal for us to, give you medical care here. Then later for him to find out that they moved her to the Black people hospital when she was in critical condition and she could have died. And then for Miss Melny, after all of that, after having experienced that, after having his granddaughter's blood on her dress, for her to be like, well, now things can go back to normal. And it's like, what the fuck?
Why did it have to go this far? Yeah.
Yeah. But for her to be like, it can go back to normal. We don't ever have to speak about this again. And we can go back to being segregated. That also is such an important moment that shows, again, how pervasive this thinking is. And
that's why I wish the episode ended on that note.
Right, exactly. Because like you're saying, it does feel pretty cheap for her to then pull up to the lunch counter and kind of tap the seat like, "Come on, buddy." Um, because the truth of the matter is, maybe her status in society as like a former politician's wife who's now dead, but she's, this like well-respected lady in the town.
Socialite, yeah.
Yeah, like maybe that would have protected her to a certain extent. But
Hmm.
the fact of the matter is, white people who were too vociferous in their advocacy for and defense of black people were punished in the way that those black people were, and maybe not to the certain extent and in the same extent and not as quickly or swiftly,
Yeah.
but uh this wasn't a problem that was going to be solved by like one or two nice white old ladies just being nice. uh and we're left in this episode being like, see, come on. And it also kind of still positions the responsibility in the hands of the black person in that situation.
Yeah.
If you had just convinced Miss Melney to be less racist, she would have been. So it still doesn't like make her responsible for her racism or for changing the system.
Hmm.
Uh, so that ending, yeah, is pretty frustrating. But
Once you've seen the light, you can't go back into the darkness.
But she could have. She was going to,
She
and she
wanted to.
probably would have.
Her follow-up line is, "Get my egg salad, Jesse."
Yeah.
She's like, "I don't care." And then a minute later, she's
Yeah.
like, "I kind of care." You make such a good point that so much of our understanding in like history class of like the civil rights movement is like, and then one day black people decided they had enough and they fixed things. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be like white people had a hand in it too, but I'm saying white people had a responsibility in
Yeah.
helping the civil rights movement grow and expand to happen and push things forward. And
Yep.
so Miss Melody and like all of the people in this town are responsible for what's happening. And I almost wonder then if there could be a future episode where Sam is a white person in the civil rights movement and
Right.
his moral
Right.
compass tells him, I actually have to help these people. The quantum leap thing doesn't say I have to, but I feel emotionally like I have to, especially, watching the show in linear order, because I've now been on the other side of it. I think that'd be super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering a similar thing because you could position him in a few different character shoes in this situation and it becomes a different episode. What if he was Miss Melney and now it means something different for him to like have the privilege or a approximate privilege to his own,
Yeah.
and to then make the choice to like use it.
Mm-hmm.
um and I don't know, like that there is something to that. Obviously then it puts him in the position where he's like kind of the white savior of the civil rights movement, which
Yeah.
is not awesome. um but again, Quantum Leap isn't really gonna do the thing that's like morally perfect because he's jumping into other people's lives. So
Correct.
at its core, the show is gonna do things that are kind of messy. Um, so I don't know, but yeah, I think it just like really oversimplifies how this change worked, because to desegregate lunch counters, it wasn't just we were brave enough to sit there. Like the college students who in the Greensboro sit-in, I believe it is in Greensboro, North Carolina, which was one of the first like very prominent lunch counter sit-in protests.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The way that they prepared for that is they like did trial runs in their headquarters with white members of the movement who berated them and threw food at them and called them the N-word. Like they practiced for it and they
Right.
practiced to be retaliated against. And that was a huge part of what the civil rights movement was about. It wasn't just like, oh, come on, if we just say the right thing, people are going to be empathetic. It was, we are going to make ourselves very visible in places where white people don't want to see us. They are going to react violently. We are going to be calm and non-responsive and peaceful, and we're going to catch them doing this on television in
Correct.
photography.
Correct.
And that's how this is going to change.
Yeah.
And I think that is like something that's super crucial about how the civil rights movement functioned,
Yes.
that this episode is just not going to be able to portray.
No.
But it ends up perpetuating, I think, a misunderstanding of civil rights. And not to say that there were not any white people who were involved or could have helped. There certainly were.
Of course.
But yeah, it wasn't just like one nice old white lady who fixed lunch counters for everybody.
Yeah, I don't have stray notes for this episode because there's so little. There's not like a lot of comedy. We talked about, the scenes of Al being like, don't hit the train. My last point is that from a meta perspective, I feel mixed about the fact that Deborah Pratt is often the one shouldered with the work of like doing these very special episodes. Like,
yeah, I mean, I wonder if she's being tasked with it, or like those are her ideas, though.
Right, we just don't know.
Yeah, we don't know the dynamic.
Yeah, because if it wasn't her, then would we be like, oh, they should have had a black person do this? Like, that's one of the complications about being a creator who makes things about sensitive issues. Is it's like, well, are you representing your own truth, and are you doing it because you feel pressured to, or what's going on there? So I think that's also worth considering. But the episode succeeds as best as it can, and I thought it prompted excellent discussion. We're learning a lot.
Yeah, and I think something to be aware of also with Deborah Pratt is she's a black woman, but she grew up in like middle class in Chicago, and so like even this experience is definitely something that she was closer to, having been born in the 50s in a black family, than I am or was.
Absolutely.
And also there is something at play there too, of like a class difference and a geographic difference.
Big time.
That certainly plays into how we're talking about, like, you're too far south to be black in the 50s is what Al says there.
Two things I just learned from her Wikipedia page: no longer married to Donald, shoutouts, and
correct.
Or I don't know if shoutouts, that's rude to say. She's also the narrator. She's the one at the beginning who I was making a comment about earlier. It sounds like Jennifer Coolidge. That's Deborah Pratt.
Okay, there you go.
And she's the voice of Ziggy when we eventually hear from Ziggy. The computer. Ziggy.
I have a couple stray notes real quick. Let's see. There's a moment where Sam is like really excited that he's a black person, because he's like, don't you see, this is amazing, this means that I could leap into like anybody.
Yeah, that's when Al is like, you could die.
Yeah, right. Al also then says, I've seen things that would curl your hair, no pun intended, which is just a little,
oh my god,
just a little quick microaggression from Al. Yeah. The cool ally. Ally. There's a moment where Sam is trying to do something medical or something, and Miss Melny's like, wow, I don't want any of your, she says, I don't want any of your colored voodoo. Is what she says.
Even though he's like, we should dress the wound, and she's just, no colored voodoo. Like, bruh.
Yeah. Well, when he's talking to the sheriff, he says, it doesn't end with this, sheriff. And the sheriff says, well, that's entirely up to you, Jesse. Entirely. Not true, sheriff. That's not how that works. You can't blame the black person for racial violence perpetuated by white people trying to uphold white supremacy. But hey, ACAB.
Yes.
It really sucks that we don't see Nell again in the episode. There isn't a moment where he reconnects with her, or she talks about her thoughts. She's just not in it anymore because it's not about her, I guess. And that kind of was a disappointment, I think.
I'd love a sequel episode.
Yeah. And then last thought, something I was thinking about. I want to see an episode where Sam becomes a woman.
Yeah,
we will. Also, that is going to involve like in the visual language of television, he can be dressed the way that Jesse was dressed and just kind of be Scott Bakula, like wearing a suit or
Yeah.
whatever. And then we just sort of know that he's black. Oh, he's looking in a mirror and there's a black guy in the mirror. Um, because people don't really as often or in as overt ways perform their race through clothing, but people do perform gender through clothing. So I was just thinking it'll be a much different dynamic when essentially it's Scott Bakula in a dress or a skirt or whatever. Um, so I'm feeling some apprehension about that, but we'll see.
Yeah, same here.
At some point that'll happen.
We shall see how that gets handled.
We shall see. Well, did we do it? Are we going back to our time?
I think so. I think we have to tease what's to come next, though.
Yeah, I think we should. So, if we return to our own time, as Ziggy has assured us we will, then we're going to return to discussing Xena Warrior Princess. But we're not going to be talking about specific episodes necessarily, because what we've been thinking is, we hear this from people sometimes, or it makes sense if we're doing a weekly TV book club. Once you kind of fall behind on the show, it's hard to catch up. There's a lot of episodes. What's going on in Xena? I can't really listen to Xena chats because I'm not caught up. We're going to record an episode next week that kind of recaps for you our thoughts on Xena Warrior Princess, the series so far, because we watched 3 out of 6 seasons. Kind of a jumping on point. Like, it's okay if you haven't been listening up to this point. Join us now. Here's what you need to know. Here's what we've been thinking. So it'll be kind of a mid-series recap episode next week.
Yeah, get everybody up to date so that with the second half of Xena, you can jump on from there, hopefully.
Yeah.
And next time we come back to Quantum Leap in at least 3 years, or at the most 3 years, we'll be finishing season 1.
That's right.
Fun stuff. John, what do we do next? Oh, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on a podcast that I do with my friend Justin called Super Smash Echoes, where we play video games related to the Super Smash Brothers franchise, Super Smash Echoes. Check it out. And you can also find me on Bluesky, notthatmagellan.bsky.social, or for now, you can read my writing at notthatmagellan.substack.com until I move it to a different newsletter platform. What about you?
You can hear me on a couple other podcasts every other week or so. You can hear me on the Creature Quorum on skinlinemedia.com talking about Pokemon with my friend Six. You can also hear me pretty much Pokemon. Got it. Sometimes the TCG, which I've been using as my fidget toy during the video recording, and sometimes about the video games like Pokemon's Black and White 2 right now. Every month or so, you hear me on the Garnet Wager talking about Korean game shows and telling a little story. And then every other month or so, you hear my work on Talking Marketing at amaboston.org. Marketing interview podcast. That's what I got. And I'm also on Bluesky at A. Ibrahim on Bluesky. This is an episode out of time, so I'm just going to go ahead and do the plug zone because I don't know how to count LeapChatz episodes and who does them. If you have questions, comments, or concerns for us, we have an email address. It's chatzpod@gmail.com. We are on Bluesky collectively at chatzpod, CHATZPOD is how you spell that term. If you're watching the video version, hello. We're on YouTube, Chatz Television Podcast. You get to watch unedited, unproduced video editions of each episode on YouTube. Give that a like and a sub if that's something you're into. And make sure to rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice. That includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Cast, Overcast, Stitcher, Banana Cast. That last one's not real. Good Pods, that's a good one. And if you have the financial means, consider supporting us and the LeapChatz project and the Greater Chatz project at patreon.com/chatzpod. We're at $1, $3, and $5 a month. You get bonus content. You get things like the ability to vote on things that get added to a wheel that we spin, and then we pick what we watch or do or play based on your suggestion. You can be on those episodes too if you ask us. You get Discord access. We have a Patreon and Friends of the Pod Discord where we watch Doctor Who every Monday. We're starting Matt Smith's era soon, at least in the present day of January 2025. And and then $5 a month gets you all that bonus content, movie commentaries, pilots, Star Trek coverage, more Star Trek coverage, and more at the patreon.com/chatspod site. And at $5 a month or more, you also get thanked at the end of every episode. So thank you too. Domestic partner of the podcast, Amanda, Arthur, Emily, Emrys, Felicia, Jen, Justin, Kyrie, Lee, Marcus, May Louise, Magellan's mom, Nick of the Brothers at Infinite War, Noel, Six, and Stefan. Thanks so much for supporting Chatz. We love you all very much. If you like our main feed art, it's done by our friend Camilla. She's at Camilla Strader on social media. Support her work. And last but not least, again, I think this might be the key, man, to finally get us to go home is we have to do a Chatzums segment. We have to recommend folks things. This is what I just got. Yeah. I just got a note from Ziggy. It says do a Chatzums and then you can go home, idiots. Don't know why I chose to be mean like that, but yeah, very rude. Chatzums are things we recommend for people between now and next week. What are your Chatzums this week, bud?
So last episode, I talked about the website screenslate.com, which you can use if you live in New York City or the Bay Area on any given day to find movies that are playing at various, like kind of art house indie movie theaters. And this week I went to one with former roommate of the podcast, Charlie. We went to a theater called the Metrograph in Chinatown, which is the space itself is, they're trying a little bit too hard to be like a hip Lower East Side bar looking place inside, and their concessions are just, we have a bag of popcorn that you can, like a little bag that costs like $8 or whatever, and I don't know, it just, they're trying to look way too cool inside, so I don't love the interior itself, but they do put on really great movie series, like a curated list of here's 15 movies on a theme that we're going to show over the course of a couple months. And they have one series going on now that's called something like They Live Among Us or They're Among Us. And it's all about aliens living amongst humans in different ways. And we went, we saw the film Solaris. Have you seen?
No, but I love Tarkovsky very much, and I've wanted to watch Solaris for years. You watched the 70s one?
Yeah.
Oh, man. How was it?
Yeah. Oh, it was amazing.
Really?
It's a movie that you got to see in a movie theater, not on your damn cell phone, or damn telephone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Basically, what I was reading about the background information is Tarkovsky, is that his name? Tarkovsky saw 2001: A Space Odyssey and was like, "What the fuck? This isn't sci-fi. It's not supposed to be like all these soulless effects. Let me give you a real human story." And he proceeds to make a movie that's basically like, what if 2001: A Space Odyssey was super Russian and dissociative and also tender? It's really good. Really good. I highly recommend Solaris.
I'm looking forward. I love, so that movie, he then went on to do Stalker, which is one of my like top 20 probably films. Incredible fucking film. And a lot of the ideas from Solaris he fleshed out more in Stalker. So if you're in a Tarkovsky mood, those two pair really well.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I've been dying to see Solaris forever. That's awesome. What a cool way to see it.
Solaris is the kind of space movie where they're like, fuck space. We're gonna go to the center of the space station to the library and we're gonna read Don Quixote to each other with no windows and talk about the human condition. And you're like, hell yeah, this is great.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Oscar noms came out this oh sorry.
No, go ahead.
The Oscar noms came out this week, and I was asking a friend of the pod, McKinley, because we both are big movie people. I was like, which one of these is the most like men talking in a room for 3 hours? And she was like, well, The Brutalist is 4 hours. And I was like, Is it good though? And she was like, I can't tell you. I need you to watch it. Fuck. I'll report back.
Sounds good. What's your chatsum for this week?
I actually also am chatzing a movie. So in the Chatz Discord, we have semi-regular but not really scheduled movie nights. Mostly thanks to listener of the podcast, Pat. Hi, Pat. If you're listening to this one, hello. And he recommended. He's doing this thing where he's like watching. I think it's like for ABCs of movies, like one for each letter of the alphabet or something, based on a letterbox list that he found. But he brought to the table 2002's Dark Water, which is a Japanese supernatural horror film directed by Hideo Nakata. This is the same guy who directed Ringu, the movie that became The Ring in the United States. I think this is before. No, it might be after The Ring. Regardless, the basic premise is that a young single mother moves into a very rundown apartment with her young daughter, and they start noticing in Japan. They start noticing like some significant issues with the apartment. There is a big leak coming from above, but nobody lives above them. There's no water running, but there was a tragedy that occurred on that floor above them. And the movie sounds really scary, and it is unsettling, and there are some good jump scare moments, but it is mostly a wonderful vibes film about the struggles of being a single mother and how the system is built around you to not believe you when you complain about things as a woman. I think it's really thought-provoking and really just immersive. Like, I don't say that about a lot of movies, but Dark Water kind of like puts you in the perspective of her and just lets you sit in the, like, even just think about you living in your apartment. You see a leak in your ceiling and you're like, how much of an issue does this have to be before I address it? How long can I let this problem fester in my life before I'm like, oh shit? Like, because it's going to cost money. No one's going to, you have to get a guy and you got to call someone, and that part sucks, and you're busy with work. The movie's kind of about that internal struggle and turns it into a really unique creative horror tragedy. So I loved it. That's 2002's Dark Water. And yeah, that's my chatsum for this week.
Nice. Very cool.
That's what we got, folks. Thank you as always to Magellan for being I don't just want to say, the Sam to my Al. Also, I think I would be Al. I think we determined this. I always forget which one we picked. But that feels right to me because I wear funny outfits and you're a nice person.
I certainly think that if I were stuck in a historical moment, I would just kind of nod my way into very dangerous situations. Just appease people until I'm mortally imperiled.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll just continue to say that, and we'll see you again in at the most 3 years for more LeapChatz. Let's leap. Let's jump in. It's caca. Oh, we did it. That's the end of the podcast.